Behind me is the model of Herod's palace in the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. This is the place that the civil trials of Jesus took place. Pontius Pilate came here during the Jewish festivals to keep the peace. The praetorium was located here in Herod's temple. This is also where Herod would stay while in Jerusalem. Now, we know that Herod was here at the same time as Pilate because he also came to Jerusalem during the festival to help keep the peace. So the events of today's study all happened here in Herod's palace. Jesus was brought here after the religious trial because the Jews were not allowed to perform capital punishment. So join us today here at Herod's palace to see the numerous attempts that Pilate made to free this man Jesus because he found no fault in him. We saw in our last study the beginning of the civil trial of Jesus. Pilate concluded that Jesus was not guilty of any crime against Rome. But the very insistent Jewish leaders argued that Jesus be tried, convicted, and executed. Pilate finds himself in a very precarious position, and as the story continues to unfold, he thinks that he finds a solution to his problem. So let's continue the account in Luke chapter 23, verses 6 through 7. When Pilate heard of Galilee, he asked if the man were a Galilean. And as soon as he knew that he belonged to Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem at that time. We see that Pilate here sees a possible out by sending Jesus to Herod. Now, why did he do this? Well, while the Jews were hurling their accusations against Jesus, someone in the crowd just happened to mention that Jesus is from the region of Galilee. Well, both Samaria and Judea were under Pilate's jurisdiction, but Galilee was not. It was still under the authority of Herod Antipas. It just so happened that Herod had also come to Jerusalem to maintain order during the Passover. What a coincidence. But when Pilate heard that, he chose to send Jesus over to Herod Antipas. So let's read the account in Luke 28, 8 through 12. Now, when Herod saw Jesus, he was exceedingly glad, for he had desired for a long time to see him, because he had heard many things about him, and he hoped to see some miracle that was done by him. So then he questioned him with many words, but Jesus answered him nothing. And the chief priests and the scribes stood and vehemently accused him. Then Herod, with his men of war, treated him with contempt and mocked him, arrayed him in a gorgeous robe, and sent him back to Pilate. That very day, Pilate and Herod became friends with each other, for previously they had been at enmity with each other. So just who is this Herod? Well, Herod Antipas was the son of Herod the Great. Now, you'll remember that he was the one who tried to kill Jesus when he was just 2 years old in Bethlehem. He died in 4 BC of worms, literally. Herod Antipas is the one who about a year or so earlier had John the Baptist beheaded, about a year or so prior to these events. Now, after hearing about the miracles of Jesus, he sent for Jesus to come to him, and Jesus simply said, "Go and tell that fox no." So Jesus had never appeared before Herod prior to the point that we are now studying. And now Herod has his opportunity. He wants Jesus to perform the miracles that he'd heard about. He wants Jesus to entertain him by doing miracles. Well, Jesus responds with silence. He does not answer any questions or do any of the signs that Herod so wanted to see. So Antipas subjects Jesus to the second mockery that he suffers on this very night. And then he sent him back to Pilate, dressed in a gorgeous robe. Now, verse 12 says, Now Herod and Pilate became friends with one another that very day, for before they had been enemies with each other. Now, why is that significant, and why were they enemies? Well, the enmity between them was created because of an event that occurred when Pilate became procurator. He brought legions up to Jerusalem, and on the outer walls of the temple compound, he hung the Roman shields. Now, the problem for the Jews is that these shields had images of gods and goddesses that the Romans worshipped. That offended Jewish sensitivities concerning idolatry. A riot broke out, and many of the Roman soldiers were killed on that occasion. But Pilate still refused to take the shields down. Now, Antipas knew that, and as long as the shields were up, they would be a constant boiling point for rebellion. So he asked Pilate to take the shields down, and Pilate still refused. So Antipas wrote a letter to the Roman Senate, and the Roman Senate then ordered Pilate to take down the shields. Now, Pilate had no choice at that point, and as a result, enmity arose between Herod and himself, because he felt that there was that Herod was not recognizing his authority. But now that Pilate sent a Galilean to one in charge of Galilee, and there is recognition of mutual shared authority, they became friends, unfortunately at Jesus' expense. Now, an interesting side note is what became of Herod Antipas. Eric Beers writes that 9 years later, in the year AD 39, his wife Herodias, who had instigated the beheading of John the Baptist, talked him into traveling to Rome to request the title of king, the same title that the Senate had given to Herod the Great. She desperately wanted to be called Queen Herodias. But the Roman Caesar of that day was a man named Gaius Caligula, and Caligula was an insane madman. He spent the treasury rather freely, mostly on his own pleasures, and when he ran out of money, he would simply accuse a wealthy landowner or a senator of some crime against the state. He would have the whole family executed, and then he will confiscate all of their goods and wealth, and then replenish the funds of the treasury once again so that he could continue his lascivious lifestyle. He was so insane that he made his own horse a member of the Roman Senate. Oh, and by the way, that horse always voted his way. It finally got so bad that the Praetorian Guard that was there to protect him ended up being the ones to assassinate him. So when Herod Antipas came asking for the title of king, Caligula's response was to simply depose them, send them to Lyon, which is now France, and the two, Herod and Herodias, died in abject poverty. They paid for their role in the beheading of John the Baptist and the cursing and the mocking of Jesus. You know, it's good for us to remember that there is a payday someday for all. Now we come to the second trial before Pilate and his first attempt to release him. Pilate will make several attempts to have Jesus released. That's the amazing thing. We read about the first one in Luke 23, verses 13 through 16. Then Pilate, when he had called together the chief priests, the rulers, and the people, said to them, You have brought this man to me as one who misleads the people, and indeed, having examined him in your presence, I have found no fault in this man, concerning those things which you accuse him. No, neither did Herod, for I sent you back to him and indeed nothing deserving of death has been done by him. I'll just therefore chastise him and release him. So what is Pilate's verdict? Well, here we see two more declarations of Jesus' innocence. Herod, by sending Jesus back to Pilate, declared him to be innocent. Now, Pilate issues the third declaration of innocence at this point. He found no guilt in this man regarding the charges which were made against him. Nothing deserving of death has been done by him, declared Pilate. And this was the declaration he attempts to use to release Jesus. But that doesn't appease the mob outside. Now, let's read the first part of John 18, verse 39. It says, "But you have a custom that I should release someone to you at the Passover." So why does Pilate raise the prospect of releasing someone at Passover? Well, he's declared Jesus to be innocent, and he hopes to release him. And he falls back on a custom that he actually developed between the Jews and the Romans. On the feast day, Passover, as a goodwill gesture, he would release a political prisoner. And as Matthew and Mark note, it would be a prisoner of the Jews' choosing. So we are now introduced to Barabbas. So let's read the four accounts in the Gospels concerning Barabbas. So let's read Mark 15, verse 7. "And there was one named Barabbas, who was chained with his fellow rebels. They had committed murder in the rebellion." Next, let's read Matthew 27 and verse 16. "And at that time they had a notorious prisoner called Barabbas." And then Luke's account in Luke 23, verses 18 and 19. "And they all cried out at once, saying, 'Away with this man! Release to us Barabbas,' who'd been thrown into prison for a certain rebellion made in the city and for murder." Then finally, John 18 and verse 40, "Not this man, but Barabbas," the crowd cried out. Now, Barabbas was a robber. The word robber in English implies someone who went around stealing things. But that would not be punishable by death in either Jewish or Roman law. Barabbas was more than just a robber in that sense. He was a robber in the same sense that Josephus used the term in his works on the Jewish antiquities and the Jewish War of AD 70. It is a term that is used of Jewish bands that were actually rebels, who would be characterized by robbing to supply their rebellion, and killing someone for those supplies would not be uncommon. This can be seen in Mark, verse 7. It says, "The man Barabbas had been imprisoned with the insurrectionists who had committed murder in the insurrection." So Mark, as well as Luke in verse 19, makes it quite clear that Barabbas was more than someone who was just stealing things. He was a rebel robber, and he was facing his own death penalty in prison. So what can we learn from the name Barabbas? Well, interestingly enough, Barabbas is not actually a name. It's a title. It's the Hellenized name formed from two Aramaic words, Bar, Abba. Bar means son of, and Abba means the name of, or was the name of the person's father. So in Aramaic, Abba means the father. He was the son of Abba. He was the son of the father. Now, the Gospels probably do not give us his actual name to help avoid confusing the reader. But one of the sources where we can find his actual name tells us that it was the same name as Jesus in Hebrew, the name Yeshua. You see, he was Yeshua bar Abba, Yeshua, the son of the Father. He had the title, but not the reality. He was actually guilty of the very crime the other Yeshua was accused of. The other Yeshua is the true son of the true Father. So what is happening? A false Messiah is being released while the true Messiah is to be crucified. Now, as we return to the narrative, we see that Pilate is still attempting to release Jesus. So let's read Mark 15, verses 8 through 10. Then the multitude, crying aloud, began to ask him to do just as he had always done for them. But Pilate answered them, saying, Do you want me to release to you the King of the Jews? For he knew that the chief priests had handed him over because of envy. Matthew 27, 17 through 18 says, Therefore, when they had gathered together, Pilate said to them, Whom do you want me to release to you, Barabbas or Jesus who's called the Christ? For he knew that they had handed him over because of envy. Now, what would Pilate be thinking and hoping here? Well, they handed Jesus of Nazareth over to him out of envy. Pilate recognized that. And by now, they might be ready to cry out for him to be released. Maybe they've discovered the errors of their ways. Maybe all of the trials that Jesus has gone through, the scourging and the beatings, is enough. So he asked them to make a choice. But at this very point, the proceedings are interrupted. And Matthew 27:19 gives us that interruption. It says, While he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent to him, saying, Have nothing to do with that just man, for I have suffered many things today in a dream because of him. So Pilate receives a message from his wife warning him not to get involved with this because of a dream that she'd had. Now, we know her name was Claudia, and in church tradition, it is reported that she became a believer. Now, we don't know that for fact, but that is what church tradition teaches. Now, let's read Matthew 27, 20 through 22. But the chief priests and elders persuaded the multitudes that they should ask for Barabbas and destroy Jesus. The governor answered and said to them, Which of the two do you want me to release to you? And they cried out, Barabbas. And Pilate said to them, What then shall I do with Jesus who is called the Christ? They all said to him, Let him be crucified. Now, what happened during the interruption? Well, the interruption apparently is long enough for the chief priests and the elders to persuade the crowds to ask for Barabbas and to ask for Jesus to be put to death. So Pilate's second attempt to have Jesus released fails. The first attempt came with the third declaration of his innocence. The second attempt is giving them this choice, which also fails to have Jesus released. So now he tries a third time to release him. Luke 23:22. Then he said to them the third time, Why? What evil has he done? I have found no reason for death in him. I will therefore chastise him and let him go. John 19:1 reports, So then Pilate took Jesus and scourged him. He tries a compromise of scourging. Now, the Gospels provide no details about the scourge because when the Gospels were written, everybody knew what a scourge entailed. But 2,000 years down the road where we are, we don't always appreciate just how much Jesus suffered before he got to the cross. Now, there were two types of scourging that the Jews were aware of. There was the Jewish scourge and there was also the Roman scourge. The Jewish scourge was called 40 save 1. Now, why 40 save 1? Well, in the Mosaic Law, the Torah, nobody could be lashed more than 40 lashes. And the question came up, suppose that the lasher miscounts and gives the victim 41 lashes and he breaks the law. So, building a fence around the Torah, in their oral traditions, they decreed that the lashing should stop at 39, just to play it safe. Hence, 40 save 1. The Jewish scourge had a wooden or leather handle with short leather strands, and the only part of the body affected was the victim's back. And while it was very painful, it was never deadly. No one ever died of a Jewish scourge. Paul says that he suffered a Jewish scourge 5 times and survived all 5 scourgings. But Jesus does not suffer the Jewish scourge. He suffers the Roman scourge, which is far more severe. There was no limitation on how many lashes could be given. The Roman scourge had a handle of wood or leather, but the straps were very long, wrapping around the whole body. The whole body was affected, front, back, sides, and even the face. At the end of each strap was a piece of sharp metal or glass or a lamb bone. So after only a few lashes, the skin was torn away. The muscle was exposed, and after some more lashes, pieces of muscle would go flying. Many never survived the Roman scourge. Now, this fulfills another Bible prophecy, by the way, because it went about his face. His face would have been rather disfigured. One of the misconceptions we have comes from crucifixion paintings that show the face of Jesus intact, except for the crown of thorns. Actually, the face was very pulpy, was literally a pulpy mass. And the records we have indicate that sometimes even family members could not recognize the victim any longer. This fulfills the messianic prophecy of Isaiah 52:14. His visage was so marred or so disfigured, he no longer resembled a man. As if the scourge was not enough, now they mock him and mistreat him further. John 19, verses 2 through 6. And the soldiers twisted a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and they put on him a purple robe. Then they said, "Hail, King of the Jews!" and they struck him with their hands. Pilate then went out again and said to them, "Behold, I'm bringing him out to you, that you may know that I find no fault in him." Then Jesus came out, wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. And Pilate said to them, "Behold the man." Therefore, when the chief priests and officers saw him, they cried out, saying, "Crucify him, crucify him." Pilate said to them, "You take him and crucify him, for I find no fault in him." And this is the fourth time that he is physically mistreated. Now, it's also his third mockery. Now, thorns in Israel are long and come to a razor-sharp point. If you even brush against one lightly, you will come away bleeding. So, why did Pilate bring Jesus out to the Jews wearing that crown of thorns and the purple robe, and then say to them, "Behold the man"? Well, he's hoping that the punishment and the mocking he's received will be enough to satisfy the envy of the crowd, which he believed caused them to hand Jesus over to him in the first place. But the response of the crowd is still to cry out for crucifixion. Now, Pilate is going to make 2 more attempts to release Jesus, but we're going to have to wait to pick up there next time. There's so much more for us to learn in this passage. So until next time, shalom.